While the world's attention is focused on ammunition shortages, inch-by-inch advances in the trenches, and the fruitless behind-the-scenes debates of political leaders, the real major geopolitical upheaval is unfolding miles away in refineries ablaze and the dark waters of the Black Sea. Those outdated, old-school military doctrines claiming that wars are won by static lines on maps have completely collapsed in the last 24 hours. Ukraine's long-range unmanned systems, in an unprecedented deep strike offensive, wiped out a full 40% of the world's largest energy superpower's oil export capacity in a single night. As massive refineries in the Leningrad region and the ports of Ust-Luga and Primorsk went up in flames one after another, asymmetric warfare spilled into the Black Sea, and an international tanker carrying Russian oil was struck directly. At the same time, the Federal Security Service (FSB) headquarters in Vyborg, once thought to be untouchable, and the caliber missile-equipped icebreakers worth billions of dollars, suffered kinetic destruction in their own shipyards. This is not a mere series of sabotage or tactical harassment fire. It is a flawless strategic execution designed to shatter a state's economic backbone, choke its global exports, and force an empire shaken from within into structural collapse, state collapse. Today, we lay out the grim global math of the halted 40% oil exports, the collapsing shadow fleets, and the ruthless asymmetric attrition driving Moscow step by step towards state bankruptcy. Let's begin. The most decisive and ruthless way to stop a war machine on the battlefield is to cut off its fuel and funding directly at the source. Recent reports from international financial institutions, energy intelligence firms, and reliable data analysis platforms have sent shockwaves through global markets. Ukraine's coordinated drone attacks deep into Russian territory over the past 48 hours have surprisingly sidelined at least 40% of Moscow's daily oil export capacity. This massive figure represents not merely a tactical success on the front lines, it signifies an irreversible tectonic shift in global energy markets and, most critically, in Russia's war budget. The targeted sites are not ordinary civilian facilities or simple fuel depots. The largest refineries in the Leningrad region, the massive Ust-Luga oil terminal on the Baltic Sea coast, and the main export reservoirs at the Primorsk port are Russia's primary lifelines to Asian markets. Having lost the European market under the crushing weight of sanctions, the Kremlin was financing its entire war budget, ammunition production, and personnel salaries entirely from oil sold to India and China via massive tankers departing from these ports. This massive export pipeline, worth billions of dollars, was ruthlessly and physically shut down by Ukrainian kamikaze drones, worth only a few tens of thousands of dollars each, equipped with low radar signature GPS guidance. Didn't that immediately make you wonder? Why can't a mighty empire protect its most vital ports and most valuable refineries, the very sources funding its war? Why can't it shut down the skies to drones? That's where the brutal asymmetric math of war comes into play. To hold front lines stretching hundreds of kilometers, thousands of miles, and defend Crimea, the Russian command had to dismantle the S-400 and Pantsir air defense umbrellas deep within the country and deploy them southward. Seeing this strategic helplessness and vulnerability, the Ukrainian military leadership targeted these exposed vital points with swarms of drones capable of flying up to 1,000 kilometers, approximately 620 miles. The issue isn't just a few burning oil tanks. Ukrainian drones are targeting the massive cracking towers, the very heart of the refineries. These units are not crude piles of iron from the Soviet era, but highly precise and complex engineering marvels built with Western, American, and European technology. If struck, it is nearly impossible for Russia to repair these towers or produce new ones using its own domestic resources due to Western sanctions. A 40% cut in exports means the Russian military's ammunition factories running out of funds, soldiers' salaries going unpaid, the central bank being forced to hike interest rates, and triggering a massive inflation spiral domestically. This is a fatal blow delivered not with bullets or missiles, but directly through dollars, barrels of oil, and a technological embargo. The burning of refineries and the surrender of ports to flames is merely the land-based part of the equation. The true game-changing move is unfolding at sea, in those dark waters, on Moscow's lifeline, the Shadow Fleet.
Rusya-Ukrayna arasındaki savaşın Karadeniz'deki seyri sefer güvenliğini tehdit eder boyuta geldiği görülüyor.
In the past few hours, an international tanker, flying the Turkish flag and owned by Turkish interests, confirmed by intelligence networks to be carrying Russian oil, was directly targeted and struck by Ukrainian unmanned systems in the open waters of the Black Sea. To interpret this incident as a mere civilian shipping accident, a diplomatic tension, or a nationalist crisis would be a grave strategic myopia. Behind this move lies a much deeper, much colder strategic message. Now, set aside everything that has happened for a moment, and let's focus on the core issue. Russia has been chartering ghost ships, flying Greek, Maltese, or other international flags to circumvent Western sanctions, conducting ship-to-ship oil transfers in international waters, and funneling billions of dollars in illicit funds into its war machine. The message Ukraine sent to the world and global shipping companies by striking this ship is crystal clear and ruthless. If you transport that illicit oil funding Russia's war budget, regardless of your flag or ownership, we will asymmetrically neutralize you in the waters of the Black Sea. This marks the first fully fledged, unmanned naval blockade doctrine in history, implemented by a state without even a traditional navy against one of the world's greatest powers. The financial and geopolitical consequences of this action are far more devastating than any losses on the battlefield. The direct targeting of ships carrying Russian oil in the Black Sea would instantly paralyze global marine insurance markets in London and New York, such as Lloyd's of London, and send war risk premiums skyrocketing. No rational international shipowner or insurance company would want to send ships worth tens of millions of dollars into waters where the risk of being struck approaches 100% and unmanned suicide boats are running rampant. When insurance premiums exceed profits and the risk becomes unmanageable, Russia's exports to the Indian and Chinese markets, on which it relies, would come to a sudden halt. They struck at oil production in the port and locked down the distribution network at sea. This is a textbook example of economically strangling the enemy, of striking at its jugular in modern geopolitics. The paralysis of the economic infrastructure, ports, and refineries was accompanied by a symbolic, psychological, and strategic devastation that deeply shook the Russian state apparatus and security apparatus. Ukrainian drones did not merely target the critical Vyborg port in the Leningrad region, located very close to the Finnish border, for economic and logistical reasons. Within the same wave of attacks, they also directly struck the regional headquarters of the Federal Security Service, FSB, the Russian state's most feared and untouchable institution. In military analyses and intelligence reports, we refer to this as the shattering of the aura of invulnerability. The fact that even the country's most elite intelligence and security agency, which instills fear in its own citizens, could not protect itself from a drone attack originating 1,000 kilometers across the border, is physical proof of the state's impotence and the massive blind spots in its radar systems. If, in the public eye, the FSB cannot even protect its own building, how will it protect ordinary citizens? However, the real major military disaster in Vyborg occurred right next to the FSB headquarters, at the shipyard. During the attack, the Perga, a Project 23,550 class caliber missile carrier under construction, the pride of the Russian Northern Fleet, was struck below the waterline and rendered inoperable. Let us note right away that this massive 9,000-ton, approximately 19,800,000 pound, warship was not an ordinary civilian vessel or a scientific research ship. It was the armed guardian of Moscow's Northern Sea Route, Arctic Route strategy, for which the Russian government has spent billions of dollars to control trillions of dollars in trade between Asia and Europe. The ship was capable of launching long-range caliber cruise missiles, which could carry nuclear warheads, hidden inside civilian-looking cargo containers. Sinking in its own secure shipyard, right under the FSB's nose, before it could even set out on its first mission, this ship represents the sinking of Russia's dreams of establishing global hegemony in the Arctic. If a state cannot protect its own shipyard or its own intelligence headquarters, how will it protect those wild and desolate global routes in the melting ice? When Beijing sees this weakness, it will begin to impose its own rules in the Arctic rather than abide by Russia's. When we put all this massive data, the burning refineries, the sinking icebreakers, and the struck FSB buildings, side by side, the picture that emerges is not a mere military defeat or tactical retreat, but one of history's greatest structural state collapse scenarios. International defense analysts, established intelligence agencies, and economic platforms all agree that the current dynamics of the war are rapidly driving Russia toward an irreversible breaking point. Let's examine the bloody and ruthless mathematics on the ground. On the front lines, particularly along the Donbas axis, the meat grinder doctrine relies on the Russian army sacrificing thousands of qualified personnel daily in open terrain to drones and cluster munitions, all for a few hundred meters of ruined trench lines. While human resources may seem limitless on paper, a society's capacity to endure the relentless stream of coffins, the dwindling workforce, and the hundreds of thousands of young people left disabled is sociologically limited. No empire in history has managed to survive for long with such a high rate of demographic attrition. While this bloody attrition vortex rages on the battlefield, behind the scenes in the capital, 40% of the energy revenues, the very lifeblood the state needs to sustain this war, were wiped out overnight. The logistical and financial backbone is cracking. The state's security apparatus, FSB, cannot even protect its own buildings. The 40% loss in revenue is forcing the central bank to print money without backing. Inflation is soaring, and shadow fleets are fishing in international waters. The Soviet Union, too, had not suffered a major conventional military defeat in Afghanistan in the 1980s. They had made gains on the front lines. However, a collapsing economy, global isolation, falling oil revenues, and a crumbling logistics network had shattered the vast empire from within overnight. Today, Moscow is being rapidly drawn into the very center of the destructive vortex it created. This is not a stalemate on the front lines, but the collapse of the system under its own weight through economic and biological exhaustion. We cannot read this logistical, economic, and industrial carnage unfolding 1,000 kilometers behind the front lines as if it were a routine evening news bulletin. This is a flawless lesson in asymmetric warfare that will be taught in Western military academies for decades to come. This deep strike concept employed by Ukraine is ruthlessly pushing Russia's economic patience toward that inevitable breaking point, while also rewriting global military doctrines. Just look at the horrific asymmetric cost-effectiveness math on the table. The Russian Federation spends billions of dollars to build a refinery, importing high-tech equipment from the West. It mobilizes thousands of engineers for 4 years to build the Perga icebreaker. Years of this massive industrial effort and billions of dollars spent are wiped out in seconds by simple GPS-guided kamikaze drones made of wood and plastic. Drones that Ukraine produces for just a few tens of thousands of dollars. This isn't just the burning of a facility. It means an army loses its time, its international prestige, and its ability to finance the war. You can find thousands of people to put in military uniforms, but when you cannot repair the spinning gears of the war economy or the struck refinery towers, those uniformed soldiers face nothing but hunger and a lack of ammunition on the front lines. The state's lie that our airspace is inviolable is slammed back in their faces every night by that massive swarm covering the sky. The public's sense of security is collapsing beyond repair. Foreign investors are fleeing at full speed, and the heavy toll of this massive war is no longer borne by the elite, but is now directly hitting the kitchens and pockets of ordinary Russian citizens. Dear viewers, to summarize, those shallow and superficial analyses claiming the war is deadlocked based on the red and blue trench lines on maps, and that Russia will win the war thanks to its manpower advantage, completely miss one of the greatest rules of geopolitics. Wars begin in the trenches, with the clash of armies, but they always end in the economy, logistics, and factories. Today, Ukraine's ruthless asymmetric strategic mind is not merely holding out in the trenches of Donbas. It is delivering a global blow to Russia's entire economic nervous system. 40% of its energy exports, the shadow fleets in the Black Sea, and the country's intelligence facilities. Burning massive refineries, sinking 9,000-ton icebreakers, frozen insurance markets, and drones striking the FSB headquarters in Vyborg prove one thing to us in the harshest terms. The illusion of the untouchable empire that the Kremlin has been building for years has now completely and irrevocably collapsed. Moscow is trapped in an asymmetric blockade where it cannot even safely sell the oil needed to finance its own war. Billion-dollar air defense systems have turned into scrap metal in the shadow of drones, costing just a few tens of thousands of dollars. The coming weeks and months will lay bare, in all its starkness, how this massive economic hemorrhage, the plummeting export revenues, and the meat grinder at the front will trigger a political earthquake within Russia's internal dynamics. No regime that lacks fuel, cannot pay salaries, has a collapsing economy, and cannot even provide security for its own elite institutions can remain safe for long within those thick-walled marble palaces. We will continue to analyze this immense asymmetric destruction on the ground, the collapsing energy empires, sinking fleets, and global fault lines, with the same seriousness and strategic acumen, piecing together the fragments. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and join us in unraveling the invisible, cold mathematics behind the war. So what do you think? Is Ukraine's massive 40% energy blackout, burning ports and sinking ships, enough to force the Putin regime to the negotiating table and bring it to its knees? Or will a cornered military power with a collapsing economy cross an irreversible nuclear threshold on the battlefield? I look forward to your valuable analyses and strategic insights in the comments. I'm Charlie from the Mr.GEOPOL team. Stay safe.